Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December 9th, 2019. Time for another show. I see my keyboard batteries are low. Does everybody know that? That's important news. I'm going to have to try and replace those during the show. So, a little fumbling around of it. I'm sure I'll have help. In just a few minutes, we'll be hearing from Greg Dorgan. No rush, Greg. I think I have enough battery to last through the first couple minutes of the show. Probably the entire show. But they're just letting me know as a matter of courtesy that the batteries are low. Lots to catch up on, of course, because it's the weekend. No longer a quiet time in our political discourse. Usually the worst stuff seems to happen over the weekend. Lots to catch up on. There are impeachment hearings back underway, and as a matter of fact, if I saw correctly, I think I may have seen via my Twitter feed on my phone that there are live streams coming now from the House Judiciary Committee. They may have begun their hearings or be about to. At least maybe the networks are covering the ramping up to the hearings. So maybe they started at 9 o'clock after all. This would be the hearings before the Judiciary Committee with the counsel, both majority and minority counsel from the Intelligence Committee, coming in to present the Intelligence Committee's report formally and to answer some questions about it. I already have socked away in pocket some work from Just Security. Susan Simpson writing for Just Security. 7 outright falsehoods in the GOP staff report on impeachment. She's giving us a preview of exactly what they'll be lying about today. Lots to catch up on with that. I think the rest of the procedure for the week, I mean, on the House floor, there's not a whole lot going on. But it looks like they will try and get, they're going to be moving quickly through the impeachment process. That probably means that we will see at least some draft articles of impeachment either be released formally or perhaps begin to leak. I put that in quotes this morning on the Good Morning Post over at Daily Kos. So we'll begin to find out exactly which articles they're thinking of including, and there may be a few last-minute surprises. We'll see whether they expand at all beyond Ukraine. I have a feeling that they'll at least hint at room for expansion, probably in the form of obstruction of justice, obstruction of Congress charges that could apply equally to both Ukraine and the Mueller report, the wider Trump-Russia issue, and leave the door open for some further investigation later. It probably ends this week with a draft coming out and discussed on Friday. The Judiciary Committee's been working weekends lately, so I expect that they will probably do the same over the next the next week and into the next weekend, and then probably I would guess probably not until next week that they are ready to vote in full committee on adopting the articles and making a recommendation that they go to the floor for a full House vote. That would likely be no sooner than next week. But next week, I'm just checking the calendar here. If not this week, next week would likely be ordinarily the last week that Congress remained in session before the Christmas holiday. Of course, there are many holidays for which they would be taking a break, and that doesn't necessarily count as around in the war, one way or the other, on Christmas. So lots to catch up on with that. I also happened to see this morning, it's a related story. Most people don't probably think of it as a related story. They could easily be persuaded, I think. Here on the Kagro in the Morning Show, of course. Oops, I got to make sure all the volumes are properly turned down. Here we go. Get ready for Greg here in just a second. I was going to say, though, that here in Kagro in the Morning, we've connected them pretty well. But the story of the 4-year ban on Russian athletes from the Olympic Games and also from the World Cup We, of course, have touched a little bit on both and more really focused on the World Cup. But there you have it. Russia, in record time, from host of the World Cup 2 years ago to banned from the World Cup, and host of the Olympics 6 years ago to banned from the Olympics. Of course, the same corruption that led them to be banned from the Olympics that condoned and backed a state-sponsored system-wide program of doping is the same corruption that led them to landing both the Olympic Games and the World Cup within a few years of each other. I don't know how many reports we have that will connect all of that, but I think we could probably provide the connective tissue there. But first, Greg Dworgan is here, and he's connected to our program, and so let's make room for you. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. I just think it's terribly inconvenient to the House to have these hearings starting at 9 o'clock and interfering with our show.
Yes.
But, there it is. So today is kind of a slow news day. We have the release of the Inspector General report on the FBI's origins of the Trump investigation. We have a release of the Afghanistan paper showing that for 18 years the government knew that they were lying about everything. Mm-hmm. Very similar to the Pentagon Papers in the Vietnam War. But of course, we had to destroy truth in order to save it. And I actually have a nice little story from Bloomberg going into that quote, that famous quote. Tom Hicks, who was it? Peter Arnott's Vietnam dispatch for the Associated Press. It became necessary to destroy the town to save it.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is something of a misquote, and that phrase has been around for a long time. There's no question that somebody said it to Peter Arnott, who reported it, but the phrase has been around for a long, long time.
Shrouded in mystery.
We have that. We have the IG
original
report.
word
We
set.
have the impeachment hearing. We have the Afghanistan papers. We have stories about Rudy Giuliani and how he's ruining things for Donald Trump. And, of course, we have Ted Cruz.
Oh, yes. I saw him
Ted Cruz is on a tear. He goes and does a John Neely Kennedy. Of course, Russia interfered with the election. But the big news is that Ukraine did, too. Just because Russia did it doesn't mean everybody else didn't do it.
Right.
So John Harwood tweets,
Also,
Ted Cruz disseminating propaganda fabricated by the Kremlin to weaken the United States. And Ted Cruz takes offense to that and says, John, this is a flat-out lie. This is all on Twitter. And you know it. You're not supposed to be a partisan hack. You claim to be a journalist, in scare quotes. Report on these facts. But Brian Beutler points out, actually, John Harwood is right. But in fairness to Ted Cruz, these things have a way of sneaking up on you. 1 minute you're betraying your conscience, the next it's your wife and father. Before you know it, it's a whole country.
Yeah, he's just taking the usual progression of things.
Yeah. So it's just amazing to see, I'm troubled by this, Susan Collins style, to, of course, everything Trump says is true, because to say otherwise means that somebody's going to yell at me or something.
Yeah, and make me grow a scraggly beard.
Something. So as far as impeachment goes, again, the hearings are starting, or at least the coverage is starting now. I'll probably be on just for the first half hour so I can at least catch some of it. What? But Amy Vanderpool tweets, Jerry Nadler sent all of the evidentiary support for Trump's impeachment to the White House yesterday for full disclosure. Oh, this letter accompanied it and was also sent to Doug Collins, who's the ranking member. So remember this, when the GOP tries to argue they are not given info or are kept out of the loop, which is, of course, what they'll do today. I'm sure the first thing that'll happen is Doug Collins will say, we need to recess for 6 weeks because you just sent us stuff last night. You can't possibly expect us to read everything in just one night. Well, the Democrats did. And so that's kind of a bogus thing, but they always do that. So this is a letter dated December 8th from Nadler to Pat Cipollone.
Yeah, I keep forgetting.
Counsel to the President, White House, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, in case you forgot where he lived. Dear, and by the way, that's almost as long as the actual body of the letter.
You're under
Dear
arrest.
Mr. Cipollone, pursuant to the impeachment procedures in the committee, I have to remember that phrase, pursuant to the impeachment committee procedures in the Committee on the Judiciary adopted under HRES 660, there's a phrase you'll hear a lot, and previously provided to you, I am furnishing you copies of reports, records, and other material committees having custody of records or other materials relating to whether sufficient grounds exist to impeach President Trump. That's, of course, the point of today's hearing. And have transmitted to the House Judiciary Committee pursuant to HRES 660. Whoever has the copyright on Pursuant is going to make a bundle today. In this regard, attached to this letter, you'll find certain transmittals we received from 1, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, 2, the House Budget Committee, and 3, the House Permanent Select Committee. Now, the Budget Committee may have questions about Trump's finances. The Budget Committee may have questions about how the money was held up with Ukraine. I don't know what the Budget Committee else is otherwise doing here, but Foreign Affairs and Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which is the third committee, clearly do. Mm-hmm. And in consultation with the chairs of the committees on Oversight and Reform and Foreign Affairs, all of which also do. A limited number of materials contain sensitive materials, so you're invited to the SCIF, and I've consulted with Representative Collins on how to do this. So the idea that Collins didn't know about it, well, the letter says he did.
I don't know.
And then right at the bottom, the magic CC that makes Washington go. CC, the Honorable Doug Collins, ranking member.
Yes.
So he knows.
CC. We'd be better off sending it to Phil Collins, I think.
Really,
Honestly,
but just it's, that Doug Collins is going to start off with a very too rapidly to understand phrase at the beginning, saying, "I demand that we have a recess. This is incredible that you're asking us to actually do business by giving us stuff in advance."
Yes. Well, that's his job, is to complain and sputter, and he's probably already doing that now because it's 12 past 9 already.
Yeah. Anyway, 7 outright falsehoods in GOP staff report and impeachment from Just Security by Susan Simpson was really quite good.
Good, all right.
And one of the 7 lies there.
7 deadly lies.
7
they
deadly.
Might not be deadly.
They
stink. We don't like them.
They're
we'll find
big
out.
ones.
Okay.
They're big ones. But one of the ones that really struck me is calling out Kurt Volker and Gordon Sondland for just lying. Flat out lying.
Okay.
And they use the word, about knowing that Burisma didn't equal Biden.
Okay.
From their own words.
They knew.
All
right.
Okay, and so that's one of the big things. Volker and Sondland were lying. It's not the sort of lie for which they will face perjury charges, because they won't, but it's also not a lie we're required to indulge. Besides, even if Ambassador Volker really was too ignorant and too incompetent to understand the significance of his actions, the Ukrainians weren't. They knew full well what Volker was asking them to do, even if Volker didn't. As Volker acknowledged in his public testimony in August, after he had cautioned Zelensky administration against opening investigations, a senior Ukrainian official, Yermak, had responded, "What, you mean like asking us to investigate Clinton and Biden?" Mm-hmm. They said that to Volker, so Volker suddenly doesn't understand what they're talking about.
What?
According to Volker, it was only later he realized Yermak was referencing Burisma and 2016 investigations that Volker had asked Ukraine to announce. So there's no dispute the Ukrainians recognized Burisma equal Biden. Whether or not Sondland or Volker knew it at the time, the Ukrainians knew they were being asked to interfere in the upcoming election. But, of course, Sondland and Volker knew it too. Volker's text messages make this plain on July 21st. This is before the phone call. Mm-hmm. Ambassador Taylor texted the group, Gordon Sondland, one thing Kurt Volker and I talked about yesterday was Sasha Daniluk's point that the President Zelensky is sensitive about Ukraine being taken seriously, not merely as an instrument in Washington domestic re-election politics.
Yes. So,
as Sondland testimony confirmed, he knew what Taylor was referring to was the agreed-upon interview and agreed-upon press statements about the investigations. In other words, Sondland knew the investigations into Burisma and 2016 were connected to President Trump's 2020 re-election campaign.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm glad he knew.
And
that's helpful.
And Ambassador Taylor made that clear, and it made clear a few days prior to the phone call. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty clear. And then they go on with other evidence that everybody knew.
Oh.
Because everybody knew about Giuliani. Yes.
They did. Although I will say
Giuliani's still there doing this stuff.
Yes, that's true. That's another worrying thing. And even Matt Gaetz couldn't explain that. I think he was asked about that over the weekend. He said, I don't know what he's doing there.
Well,
I don't
Devin
know if that's
Nunes
such a great
was also
idea.
asked a bunch of stuff, and he got really mad. Threatened to sue everybody who even asked him a question.
Yes. Plus, I did catch him on Twitter creeping around the lobbies of fancy hotels taking pictures of young men. I thought that was weird and disconcerting, and I hope someone's talking to him about that.
Meanwhile, the Post has a story. Inside Giuliani's dual roles, power broker for hire, and shadow foreign policy advisor, in which, of course, John Kelly slips in. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. Don't blame me. There's a piece inside that reports as Reince Priebus's successor, John F. Kelly, tried to limit Giuliani's reach, scheduling his meetings with Trump at the White House residence so he wouldn't interact with other White House staff. Former administration officials said, I wonder who that former administration named John Kelly is, who gave.
It's not so good, actually. I mean,
Kelly also told others he didn't want to be part of calls or meetings with Giuliani, people said.
Yes. I mean, I believe he did that. But I believe that his
I
story
want you to
about
know
why.
I did that. I mean, you can't blame me. I knew he was doing something illegal. We all knew, of course. I just wrote a book about it and called myself anonymous because I really tried to save the country. I failed, but I tried. You have to understand, my heart was in the right place, right there in those cages with the kids that I placed.
I mean, to me, like, I know he's reading that as like, I did this because I wanted everyone to be distanced from it. If they're going to break the law, that's their business, et cetera, et cetera. I read it as when the president wanted to do some illegal cheating, I scheduled the meeting and I made sure to do it in secret away from everybody in the residence so that they wouldn't be found out. Oh, that's a different interpretation of what I did. Maybe that's troubling.
Right.
Probably should have
Meanwhile, this story also points out that Giuliani had conversations with John Bolton about other aspects of foreign policy, including Venezuela. So, John Bolton, hardly the hero. He basically, according to Adam Schiff, told the Intelligence Committee, you can subpoena me, but, good luck with that. I'm going to court and screw you.
Okay. Hiding behind
so that's why John Bolton wasn't asked. That's why John Bolton wasn't subpoenaed. That's why John Bolton is not testifying. It's because John Bolton decided he doesn't want to. And so that's the end of that. Yeah, you can go out and get these things. It's going to take a year. And so it's just fascinating that official Washington, and especially reporters covering official Washington, continue to place a veneer of respectability on some of these non-denial denials, starting at the top with the president, of course, trying to treat him as if he's a serious president,
right?
As opposed to somebody who's basically running a crime family, extending to Bill Barr, who still is trying to put his finger on the scale in regard to the IG report. Apparently, he declassified stuff and added it to the report about Michael Steele without telling Michael Steele. Or what's his name? Steele.
Christopher Steele.
Christopher Steele. There's like
two
19
Michael
Steeles going around Washington, most
Remington.
of them Michael. But Christopher Steele, yeah. So normally what happens is if you're going to do something like that, you let the person know. They get a chance to comment on it. There's a give and take. But Barr did it last night. Just in time for the thing to be out today.
I think that would outrage
it's going to be
Doug
non-flattering material about Christopher Steele.
Yeah. That'll be interesting when Doug Collins complains about things that happened last night. So,
right.
I'm glad you brought that up.
And the funny part about it, of course, is that one of the fascinating things about the House Intel report that came out last week is that it was one of the documents about what went on that Bill Barr didn't have a chance to put his finger on the scale about. And it's just so refreshing to see something that's actually trying to tell you the truth rather than Bill Barr's spin.
Yes. It would be nice.
It would be nice. So, just keep that in mind because, again, that's one of the three big stories out today. The impeachment, the IG report, and, of course, the Afghanistan papers. I don't know if there's a lot to comment about that. Anybody who blogged in like 2003, 2004, and I include myself, certainly include you, kind of knew this at the time, said so. We were right. The pundits were wrong. They don't like to remember that. A lot of them have never apologized for full-throated supporting the Iraq Afghanistan thing. Remember, bin Laden was at Tora Bora, and Bush pulled all that stuff back.
True.
And invaded Iraq instead. So, again, it's the Iraq war, not just the Afghanistan war. But part of the deal with Afghanistan, according to these newly released papers, is that nobody really knew what winning meant. Nobody knew who the enemy was. They had no idea who they were fighting.
Right.
It's like invading a country and not realizing that Sunnis and Shias don't like each other.
Yeah, well, that would have been worthwhile to find out ahead of time. And
well, that's what happens when you don't listen to these so-called experts.
Yes.
Which is what we're seeing now in Spades on Steroids.
Yeah. And I was interested or intrigued when you were pointing out that the escape from Tora Bora. These Saudis always seem to get away. Related to another story that happened recently as well. I mean,
Yeah, a little bit of Saudi terrorism with Trump already making apologies for them before even finding out the facts.
Right. I think we're up to speed on that one. I mean, we'll discuss it, but I don't want to detract. But just
so let me read Matthew Miller's little tweet storm here about the IG report.
Okay.
You see him often on MSNBC as spokesperson. One thing to remember about today's IG report is that it all grew out of Trump's 3/17 tweet, March 17th, March 2017, tweet claiming Obama had his wires tapped.
Oh, yes, right. Okay. Thank you.
Right? That was insane. But rather than reject it, the GOP rallied around a parallel allegation that Carter Page was illegally surveilled.
Yeah, sounded somewhat more plausible.
There was no evidence for that, but Sessions asked the IG to investigate the conspiracy theory. Then Rosenstein gave in to Trump and asked the IG to investigate another insane claim that the FBI had spied on his campaign. Today, we may find out that both allegations were false, but it won't matter. Trump got his investigations. He effectively cast doubt over what should have been accepted reality, and he has an attorney general in place now who still isn't accepting it. And, of course, he and Fox won't now.
That's
the exact same thing's happening now with Ukraine. Trump has made an insane claim that Ukraine hacked the DNC. The GOP can't defend it, so they're advancing parallel theories about Ukraine meddling. That's what that whole Ted Cruz thing was.
Yes.
And John Neely Kennedy as well. They have raised doubts and will surely get investigations into it. Remember, they're threatening to investigate the Bidens in the Senate. So the beat goes on. Trump, with the GOP in his corner, will surely find a way to get some investigation launched into the Democratic nominee in 2020. It's their core playbook now. It's how he got himself elected in 2016, let's not forget. But the lessons here, rather, go back to the mistakes Sessions and Rosenstein made at the outset. Don't launch investigations when there's no evidence of wrongdoing just to satisfy people who don't want to be satisfied. You're not knocking down conspiracy theories, you're furthering them. And for the press, same thing. Ignore the nonsense. Not all questions deserve answers. Try not to chase every shiny object, even when it has the gloss of an official investigation. So I guess we're not going to do Flushgate.
Too bad. I'd like to see that looked into.
Yeah. Well, it's a bunch of crap, I'm telling you. So that no longer means what it used to, sadly, to have the veneer and the patina of an official investigation. And that's what happens when you have a scumbag like Bill Barr, the most corrupt attorney general since John Mitchell, only unfortunately a little more clever, in charge of the Department of Justice. Nobody trusts them.
Yes.
It's a terrible thing and doesn't get enough discussion. But every time Barr tries to put his finger on the scale about the another report criticizing Trump, we have to remember that he has ruined what's supposed to be a nonpartisan position.
Yes. He had help.
Right.
Yes.
And don't give me nonsense about Eric Holder. And yes, it's true that Robert Kennedy was AG back in the day. Whataboutism doesn't save what's going on here.
No. And it certainly does. Well, it wouldn't help them to what about this, but it would have the benefit of being true. Alberto Gonzalez. But okay, that's your guy. So.
Well, he's dumb, but I don't think he was quite as corrupt as.
Not as corrupt, but I mean, if we're talking about the process of destroying the Department of Justice and politicizing it from top to bottom, that's what we caught Gonzalez on. He was dumb.
Mitchell wound up in jail. What happened to Gonzalez?
He was forced to resign in disgrace.
Then not the same thing as winding up in jail.
No, but I have a feeling we might not see Barr go to jail either, and we're right about him.
Which is unfortunate, but he is another guy who should be impeached.
Yes, and they should be doing that right alongside him. And by the way,
but then again, everybody who serves with Donald Trump is going to, be tainted by Donald Trump forever, or as we like to say in Brooklyn, forever.
Oh, well,
forever.
That's true. There's no escaping it. There shouldn't be. And, if that orange paint comes off on your hands.
When you're covering this stuff, just don't give Barr the veneer of respectability.
Good idea.
Don't. He doesn't deserve it.
No. That's true.
It's true.
Okay. Looks like Doug Collins might be yelling at the moment.
Oh, yeah?
I see empty
Yelly
wheeler.
Jordan's term isn't yet, huh?
Yeah, not yet. The logic of Doug Collins' claim that the Dems are only doing this because without it they can't win the election is an admission that Trump intends to cheat to win, says Empty Wheel. So I guess that's. I guess it must be his turn to yell now. I took a peek before. It was Jerry Nadler going on at length. Yeah, there he is. Doug Collins is up and blathering. Although he's speaking.
He
from
gets
text.
more into his 5 minutes, but
Yeah.
again, as somebody, I think it was Mark Leibovich was reporting on this, said the Democrats are trying to structure these committee hearings to absolutely positively try to avoid open mic night, which is I just
hard
call
to do.
it, I meant BS rounds, but it's the same thing. Right. It's hard to do, but that's the whole idea of having specific statements, not allowing people to horn in or I yield my time to the Republican member from yelling, and why you have the council asking the questions for a good chunk of when people are actually watching, which is to say the beginning.
Yes.
So pretty interesting. And, of course, the other thing that's going to be interesting today is whether or not Mueller and the obstruction of justice stuff makes its way into the articles of impeachment, which, of course, is what's supposed to be discussed today.
Yeah. I don't know whether we'll find the answer to whether they're going to do the obstruction thing in the articles today, but they'll certainly be discussing it. Better angle on exactly what the disruption this morning was about. Christina Wilkie saying it's Andy Biggs who chimed in with a scripted point of order. That's what you were looking for. Judiciary Chair Nadler, of course, had a scripted response. They already knew what their objection was going to be.
The gentleman is not recognized.
Right. And then Doug Collins is in the middle of screaming
about... In fact,
about...
I passed you multiple times a day. I have no idea who you are.
Right. So Doug Collins' role today is reading the scripted rebuttal to Nadler's scripted dismissal of Biggs' scripted point of order. That's where we are.
Good work, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Oh, okay. Yes, go
watch.
Check it out. Thanks very much for stopping by and getting us started today. Take care. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, let's see. There's any number of directions we can go in here. I think it's probably worth pausing for Mike Musson's comment letting us know that in a nod to Trump's preferences, you can just read the impeachment for the articles. Get it? I love that. I always enjoyed that one. That's one of my favorite lines. I usually say it about the Constitution. But, people are very into the Bill of Rights. It's very weird. And so I like the articles myself, and no one ever believes me. Okay. Let's see. Lots of catchphrases, I guess, being bandied about over at the impeachment hearings. I can't believe I don't get to watch them. But they'd be, you know what? I don't know. If I was free at the moment, would I watch? It is about as close. It holds about the same, a little more interest to me, just because of the subject matter. But it's, I guess, a little bit like watching the debates or a State of the Union address or something. These are set plays, and I just wait for the highlight reel to come out and find out what people are accusing people of that were bombshells or brand new later on. And sitting through the entirety of the hearing is, we should think about that. Here I am. I do this, Now, I wouldn't exactly say it's for a living, but it does happen that I pay some, we'll say, semi-professional, semi-attention to what's going on, and you still can't interest me in these things, and that's probably bad news in terms of are other people watching. On the other hand, I am watching the highlight reels, and so is everybody else. So I don't know. I guess that explains why they're constantly playing to the highlight reel editors as opposed to pursuing the substance of things. But okay, let's see. Well, the fight continues there. Taking a look, I had set aside, like Greg did, the 7 outright falsehoods in GOP staff report on impeachment article from Susan Simpson, but it is an enormously long piece, and I don't know if we could get through it. Quite honestly, it's very long. It's not the longest thing you've ever seen, but it's pretty dense, and Greg did a good job, I think, summarizing it. We'll perhaps look back on this is the sort of thing that maybe we ought to follow along with the hearings. It's certainly a good reading for you to take care of ahead of time, although, like I said, or as she says, most of this will play out today, so maybe it's better to just watch it play out, and then if Susan is up to it, she can do a highlight reel afterwards and say, all right, I hit it on 5 out of the 7, and take a well-deserved victory lap on having called things correctly. But all right, I just maybe we'll fall back on it at some point, or maybe try and get some highlights to glean from it and share other than what Greg had run through. I mentioned to you about the ban on Russian athletes' participation in world sport competition. I don't know how far the ban extends, but I do know this. It's a 4-year ban, so as Kate Sherrill points out, this will cover both the upcoming Summer Olympic Games next year, 2020, in Tokyo, and the next Winter Games, which will be in 2022. Those in Beijing, is that right? Beijing and Tokyo. Well, that's a new one, a new combination for the Olympic Committee. By the way, Beijing Winter Games, does that work? What's the I don't even know. Do they have the climate for it? Once you had them, the Winter Games in Sochi, I guess you can have them anywhere. And by the way, if you are somehow caught by surprise by systemic Olympics-linked corruption in the Russian program, I guess you don't have to look any further than being awarded the Olympic Winter Games for Sochi. Probably should have tipped you off to that. Even as a casual observer, you likely saw the television investigations on American networks saying, yeah, Sochi isn't really like a winter venue. They don't, have snow per se in Sochi, but they're not that far, on a global scale from some mountainous regions where they do have some snow and can host ski runs, but it's not a winter setting, Sochi. And I don't know if Beijing is either, but yeah, I guess the thinking is on the International Olympic Committee that, okay, well, they need to have a certain amount of hotel and electronic infrastructure in order to host the games. And if they are whisking the athletes away and, having them decamp to other sites around the same country, at least, in order to have their competition, well, I guess that counts. It's ever since they moved the soccer program into the Olympic Games. Nobody has enough stadiums to have all the various Olympic soccer tournament games inside the host city. Those are very often dispersed throughout the entire host country. And I guess once they did that, they said, why don't we have the skiing do the same thing? It's no big deal. Or for that matter, various Olympic Games, the sailing and canoeing and kayaking events very often have to be held away from the main Olympic village. So that concept has sort of exploded in the last few years. So maybe they're just getting the same break as everybody else. But there really is something to it, and we have discussed this in terms of the FIFA corruption and the sweepstakes that goes on in the competition for hosting the World Cup, and it's very similar. It feels like in nature to the competition that goes on for hosting the Olympic Games, and it's because the commerce surrounding the games can be so lucrative and involves an awful lot of cash and cash from international sources and people who don't live there and can't hang around long enough to, say, press their cases in prosecutions for fraud when they're ripped off there. But at any rate, we mentioned not only the varying various stories about possible corruption and bribery among the FIFA officials who make the decision of where to site the World Cup games, which is very lucrative for locals, and some of that and cash that they anticipate harvesting from the World Cup being hosted in their city. They sometimes will kick back or kick up in advance to the FIFA officials who make the decision, and whoever is offering the best rates might be the one who lands the games. Like, I guess another thing, there's been a lot of controversy, the very next World Cup being hosted in Qatar, which is not really like the most hospitable climate either for soccer, which is, of course, played on grass, although now you can play it on artificial surfaces as well, and so now you can play it anywhere, but it's awfully hot and dry. But they love sponsoring soccer events, certainly. They're all the state airlines is all over everybody's jerseys all over the world, so, you know, the interest and the money was there, so there you have it. We're just having the World Cup here in this tiny place in the middle of the desert, and you're all going to have to come here and pay inflated prices for Coca-Cola and whatnot, and that's just the way it's going to go. So, but we learned about all that, not only about all that corruption that led to all of that, but we also learned about how many of the relevant FIFA officials to this sort of corruption just kind of magically live in Trump Tower, which is sort of a weird thing to have happen, but an interesting connection to the stories most of us were spending the bulk of our time paying attention to. So there is a connection there. Let's see. I've got, there's plenty of news reports on the ban itself. I happen to have one at the ready from CNN. Kate had sent me from the BBC. What should we try the BBC one instead, because it's like so international and stuff? Or maybe they'll tell more truth over there. I don't know. Boris Johnson is the prime minister there. Maybe they're not better at this at all. But I don't know. All right, why not? Just for the fun of it, we'll open the BBC one and tip our hats. It gives us a chance to tip the hat to Kate on that. Let me mark that so we can get it into our roundup. Russia banned for 4 years to include the 2020 Olympics and 2022 World Cup. So, by the way, we might as well name names in terms of who's responsible for all this. Russia has been handed a 4-year ban from all major sporting events by, who's doing this? Who's responsible for this? The World Anti-Doping Agency, which is a thing. If you're an Olympic caliber athlete, you know it's a thing. But what are you doing here? You should be out training. Maybe you're listening via podcast in your bobsled. I don't know. But the World Anti-Doping Agency, big deal, and it's listed here as WADA, W-A-D-A, so just for short. It means the Russia flag and anthem will not be allowed at contests or at events such as the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and Paralympics, don't forget them, and football's 2022 World Cup in Qatar. But athletes who can prove they are untainted by the doping scandal will be able to compete under a neutral flag. So it's not necessarily that the athletes get screwed if they are pawns in all of this. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, I was just wondering, whatever happened to Medvedev? What's he doing these days? He's the Prime Minister, and you never hear his name. But anyway, Medvedev said the ban was part of chronic anti-Russian hysteria. It's weird. The whole world thinks they're cheaters and fraudsters by some weird coincidence. It is obvious that significant doping problems still exist in Russia. I mean, our sporting community, he said. This is impossible to deny. And by the way, interesting, I don't know whether he made that comment in English or in Russian and had it translated, but it's an interesting slip, right? It's obvious that significant doping problems still exist in Russia. I mean, our sporting community. And you could see why he might have made that slip, but on the other hand, is it even a slip? Honestly, if we've talked about there being no line very often between criminal activity, criminal organizations, and governmental bodies, and really no different here in the sporting community. And of course, the accusation here is that it's a state-sponsored doping program. So, I mean, he gives a little more away, I think, than he thought he was giving away in his comment. Let's see. Okay. I didn't even realize, Kate, that you had sent the CNN link as well. I have a CNN article that I happen to have at the ready, but it's a very short... Oh, no, it isn't. It's... All right. I'm sure it's comparable. I happen to have the article, but she was saying she said she actually sent us a CNN thing and then deleted it and sent the BBC thing. All right. We'll stick with the BBC thing. No reason not to, except for the fact that I just clicked on the window and it disappeared for a second. There we are. So Medvedev says it's part of chronic anti-Russian hysteria. Obvious that doping problems still exist in Russia, by which I mean the government, but I mean, actually just the sports. Impossible to deny, so thank you for not trying. But on the other hand, he continues, the fact that all these decisions are repeated, often affecting athletes who have already been punished in one way or another, not to mention some other points, of course, makes one think that this is part of anti-Russian hysteria, which has become chronic. And who knows why it would have become chronic. No one can guess. WADA's executive committee made the unanimous decision to impose the ban on Russia in a meeting in Lausanne, Switzerland, on Monday. It comes after Russia's anti-doping agency. They have their own place. It's not working very well. But that, by the way, is RUSADA, Russia, R-U-S, Anti-Doping Agency, ADA. Okay. Anyway, it comes after RUSADA was declared non-compliant for manipulating laboratory data handed over to investigators in January of 2019. So, rotten to the core, of course. Here's the data, here's the lab data that shows all your people are doping. Well, why don't we erase all of this? Or they manipulated the data in some way. Not supposed to do that, obviously. It had to hand over data to WADA as a condition of its controversial reinstatement in 2018 after a 3-year suspension for its vast state-sponsored doping scandal. So, yes, that has happened before. Interesting that Medvedev takes the position, well, they were already punished once, but I guess they just kept doping. And, you got to punish them twice if they're recidivists. WADA says RUSADA has 21 days to appeal against the ban. If it does so, the appeal will be referred to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. This is interesting just because I'm finding out about the institutions that are doing the work, and I imagine that at some point that'll become important. So the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS. They have their own acronym. I guess everything does. It's a matter of whether people use it or not. WADA President Sir Craig Reedy said the decision showed its determination to act resolutely in the face of the Russian doping crisis. It's interesting that there's no IOC involvement in this, at least to this point in the article. And I guess that makes some sense, right? The IOC would be the people who made the decision about taking the bribe money to put the Winter Olympics in Sochi. And so they're not going to be the ones, they've got their payoff. It would be cause for the mobster oligarchs to murder the members of the IOC, which is a tall order in some cases because they're awfully famous and sometimes particularly well-guarded people. But you'd have to murder them if you sent your payoffs there and then you got banned. So they're having WADA take care of the ban instead. And I guess we're supposed to rely on the notoriety of Sir Craig Reedy to protect him from just being outright killed by Russian mobsters. Hope it works. Good luck, Sir Craig. Let's see. So there's lots to it. It is very interesting, and I am interested in reading about all of the various institutions involved. And I want to skip that. Well, maybe I have to read this because there's interesting detail everywhere, but I wanted to move on to a different angle on it. Maybe we can work that in before the break. WADA Vice President. I guess we should read this. Boy, there's a lot of skipping around I'm doing here. So Craig Reedy speaks up and says the decision showed its determination to act resolutely in the face of the Russian doping crisis. And he added, for too long, Russian doping has detracted from clean sport. The blatant breach by the Russian authorities of RUSADA's reinstatement conditions demanded a robust response. That is exactly what has been delivered. Russia was afforded every opportunity to get its house in order and rejoin the global anti-doping community for the good of its athletes and for the integrity of the sport, but of sport in general. But it chose instead to continue in its stance of deception and denial. But WADA Vice President Linda Helleland said the ban was not enough. I wanted sanctions that cannot be watered down, she said. We owe it to the clean athletes to implement the sanctions as strongly as possible. Not clear what she thinks we're missing out on here. A total of 168 Russian athletes competed under a neutral flag at the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang after the country was banned following the 2014 Games, which it hosted in Sochi. Russian athletes won 33 medals in Sochi, 13 of which were gold. And I guess so my figures are wrong. It wasn't 6 years from host to banned. It was 4 years from host to banned, essentially. I mean, if the Russian athletes had to compete under the neutral flag, I had forgotten all about it, in 2018. So that's just hosting 2014, banned 2018. So off by 2 years on that one. Russia has been banned from competing as a nation in athletics since 2015. Wow, so there you go. 1 year is the real answer. I wonder, look at how many levels are involved in banning them. Despite the ban, Russia will be able to compete at Euro 2020. Why? Because St. Petersburg is a host city. As European football's governing body, UEFA, is not defined as a major event organization with regards to ruling on anti-doping breaches. How do you like that? FIFA said it had, quote, taken note of WADA's decision, adding, FIFA is in contact with WADA. Don't let your gremlins come in contact with WADA, by the way. I give up. All right. Good night, everybody. I'm giving up. The FIFA is in contact with WADA to clarify the extent of the decision in regards to football. I mean, what's the problem? In a statement, the International Paralympic Committee, IPC, said those responsible for the manipulation of data from the Moscow laboratory before it was transferred to WADA appear to have done everything possible to undermine the principles of fair and clean sport, principles that the rest of the sporting world support and adhere to. A little clarity from the IPC there, thank you. This sincere lack of respect toward the rest of the global sporting movement is not welcome and has zero place in the world of sport. It's only right that those responsible for this data manipulation are punished. True. And a good point there. A lack of respect toward the standards that the rest of the world holds. That goes for their political interference as well. Not to mention their outright invasion of Ukrainian territory. How did we get here? Is the next section here. Do I want to... I guess it's not that much more to plow through. RUSADA was initially declared non-compliant in November 2015 after a WADA commissioned report by sports lawyer Professor Richard McLaren alleged widespread corruption that amounted to state-sponsored doping in Russian track and field athletics. A further report published in July of 2016 declared Russia operated a state-sponsored doping program for 4 years across the vast majority of summer and winter Olympic sports. In 2018, WADA reinstated RUSADA as compliant after the national agency agreed to release data from its Moscow laboratory for the period between January 2012 and August 2015. However, positive findings contained in a version courtesy of a whistleblower, in 2017 were missing from the January 2019 data, which prompted a new inquiry. It's not only cheating, it's dumb cheating. WADA's Compliance Review Committee, and by the way, it's cheating on the level of individual athletes doping, and it's also cheating on the level of let's hide the data that shows these individual athletes are doping. It's double cheating. WADA's Compliance Review Committee, CRC, recommended a raft of measures based in particular on a forensic review of inconsistencies found in some of that data. As part of the ban, Russia may not host or bid for or be granted the right to host any major events for 4 years, including the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. But they can host the Euro Cup or whatever it was. What do they call that? Yeah, Euro 2020. I guess it is the Euro Cup. Okay. Where do we leave off here? As part of the ban, they can't host, they can't bid. The reaction? UK Anti-Doping, UKAD, Chief Executive Nicole Sapstead said WADA's decision to impose a ban was the only possible outcome to reassure athletes and the public, etc., etc. Is there anything different? Oh, look at this. So let's see. However, Travis Tigart, Tygart, Chief Executive of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, they don't bother calling us USADA or anything, but I guess we are, said not imposing a blanket ban on all participation by Russian athletes, even under a neutral flag, is a devastating blow to clean athletes. So we wanted even more. So I guess if he finds out about it, does President Trump call for the arrest of Travis Tigart? How dare you insult my Russian friends? Well, it'd be interesting to see whether Trump has anything to say about this, or whether his advisors are successful in telling him, you got to stay out of this. It doesn't make any sense for you to involve yourself in, which pretty much guarantees that he will involve himself in it after all. So why is it important? Why did I spend that much time on it? And the answer is, I don't know. I didn't know what I was getting into when I started, or rather that there really is a political angle to all of this. And for that, I'll turn to, at least for a little while before the break, to Julia, is it Ioffe, how she pronounces it? Ioffe, very widely read and widely shared author, writing at The Atlantic, How the Kremlin Tried to Rig the Olympics and Failed, a Study in Humiliation. This is a piece from December of 2017, actually, but as we know, this anti-doping thing has been going on for some time. She was tweeting this article around along with a comment that made it sound like we might find some interesting links to the FIFA and IOC corruption issues we've touched on in the past. And I hope it lives up to it. I don't see why it would not. And we'll begin with her piece here. When the Russian national hockey team, just by way of setting the place here, lost to Canada 7-3 in the hockey quarterfinals of the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver, forward Alexander Ovechkin knew it would be bad. Now the dirt will pour down on us, he said at the time. I feel bad about that. Imagine being under that pressure. The dirt poured down from the very top. Because of disgraceful performance of our team, I'm afraid to approach TV set, tweeted Dmitry Rogozin, then Russia's ambassador to NATO. How on earth could we have blown it so disastrously in hockey? Then President Dmitry Medvedev, remember him, canceled his trip to the closing ceremonies, and the Siberian city of Tomsk held a moment of silence. I, that is Julia, was living in Russia at the time, suspicious, and I had never seen any country take the Olympics so seriously. Everyone I spoke to was shocked and utterly humiliated. It was the first time in Olympic history that Russia didn't even get to compete for a medal in hockey. But other Olympic humiliations abounded. Russia failed in that other sacred Russian winter sport, figure skating. The Russian skating pair that was favored to do well in the Olympics had to change their routine, called Aboriginal dance, after it was decried as racist. That's weird. Yevgeny Plushenko took only silver and was so upset about it that Vladimir Putin, who was then the prime minister, had to publicly comfort him, saying, "Your silver is worth gold." It had to be, because Russia didn't win that many golds in Vancouver. Even the Netherlands won more gold medals. Not the Netherlands. Wow. I mean, okay. Russian athletes only brought home 15 medals total, finishing 11th in the medal count, despite being a country that was long seen as an Olympic juggernaut where winter takes up more than half the year. Shamed and pilloried. Did they really have to be, though? The head of the Russian Olympic Committee resigned, and Russian leadership spoke of serious reform. The place we got in Vancouver is not worthy of our country, said Vitaly Mutko, the sports minister at the time and a friend of Putin. You know what that means. We have to do everything we can to restore our relationship in world sports. So they ruined it. He promised to take personal control over the preparations for the Sochi Olympics, where the stakes would be far higher and which were just 4 years away. So basically he was stepping up to take the biggest chunk of the bribes. What if Russian athletes flopped on their home turf? It was a nightmare scenario. This is how we got to Tuesday's ban of the entire Russian team and various Russian officials, including Mutko, from the 2018 Winter Olympics, just 2 months before the opening ceremony in South Korea. There is a straight line from Vancouver to Pyeongchang with a sordid stop in Sochi. And, of course, our break is just about upon us, so we'll just read a little bit into the music and then over it, and perhaps come back to this afterwards. Authoritarian regimes love organized sporting events, like the Olympics, and Russia was one of the initiators of that love affair back when it was the Soviet Union. And we did, I know, mention at some point in our discussion of the Olympic things that, it's also authoritarian regimes who are able to bid most effectively to host these things because they have command economies and they can essentially insist that everything be reconfigured in order to do what's necessary to put together the best looking bid, the most attractive bid with the most bribes in it. And of course, order the entire country's production geared toward getting ready for the Olympics as well. So no surprise, authoritarian regimes also happen to just love the spectacle of it all, not to mention the fact that they can rip everybody off at concession stands. So, interesting. We'll return after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Just that 1 minute break here to catch the breath. We left off with the new section of the Atlantic piece by Julia Ioffe here. Authoritarian regimes love in Twitter parlance, organized sporting events like the Olympics, and Russia was one of the initiators of that love affair back when it was the Soviet Union. Everyone kind of remembers that if you're old enough, right? For decades, the Kremlin poured money into Olympic sports. It was an important piece of propaganda for both the world and the Soviet home front. We are a superpower and our people are super people. Parents eagerly turned over their children to Olympic factories that would make their young ones into athletes who could do their country proud and get their families a little extra something, be it more food or Western electronics. Olympic events like the famed 1980 hockey match between the United States and the Soviet Union, known as the Miracle on Ice, offered easy analogies for larger geopolitical struggles. To be a true global superpower, you had to defeat your enemies in every arena. Putin, like most people who survived the Soviet Union, never lost that vision of the Olympics as a proxy for geopolitics. I hope they don't ignore just the flat-out money situation in all this. It is why the flop at the 2010 Olympics stunned and humiliated Russia as much as it did. Russia looked in the mirror and didn't like what it saw. No money. It found that despite a decade of unprecedented economic good fortune, for some anyway, of surging oil prices and rising salaries, of the glitz and glamour of its cities, for the oligarchs anyway, the country was rotten at its core, and still is, I would say. In the 2 decades since the collapse of the Soviet Union, its infrastructure had crumbled and was never rebuilt. The glitz, it turned out, was just I say patina, although I did hear Greg today offer up patina, of false prosperity. I'm not certain which one is right, so I'll use both. Mutko was unsparing in his assessment when the Olympic delegation returned, humiliated, to Moscow. There are a lot of problems, he said. In March 2010, over the years, we've frittered away our sports science and lost our human potential. He noted that foreign athletes were trained by Russian coaches who had left Russia, True. And that in many sports, there was no new generation waiting in the wings. There's also the problem of doping. That's the one we were trying to get at. Problem of doping, he said. Some of us can no longer think of preparing athletes without including doping substances. We began to fight doping with more conviction. All of these, he said, are systemic problems, and the sports ministry was working to solve them. Neither I nor the Ministry of Sport deny our responsibility for the performance of the Russian team at the Olympics in Vancouver. He said, we will do a serious analysis, and there will be changes, both in terms of organization and personnel, on the basis of our experience in Vancouver. And I guess that's another of the illustrations of the differences between the American system and the system of, a lot of countries, not just Russia, but many especially authoritarian countries, that they even have ministries of sport. Although you could certainly argue, well, we too have a ministry of sport. We just don't call it that and acknowledge it as a formal part of government. But the U.S. Olympic Committee and the various sport governing bodies are considered almost quasi-governmental, especially in their power and reach. But we try to pretend that they are separate entities and they don't have anything to do with our government operations, but I'm not certain that that's really true here. All right, let's see. Taking note of some of the activity being directed my way on Twitter, but let's continue on with the article here. An analysis did come just 4 months later and in the form of an audit from the Russian Treasury. It found that one of the reasons for the Russian failures in Vancouver was Mutko and the way he spent ministerial finances. In fact, Mutko had spent so much money on himself, as oligarchs frequently do. He had spent so much money on himself. How much money? For instance, $1,400 a night on hotel rooms for 20 days, during which he had an astonishing 97 breakfasts. I think he shared a little bit. That there was little left for the actual athletes and their support staff, many of whom traveled to Vancouver on their own dime. Mutko may have spoken that spring about his responsibility, but he took none this time. Any big organization will have its problems, Mutko said when the report came out, but I see a system that's nearly ideal. I don't see a single problem. You couldn't possibly call 17 fourth-place finishes an ineffective use of funds, except, that they believe that all 17 should have been, medals anyway. But, okay, so he was basically using all the money for himself, and he finds that to be a perfect system. No surprise in an oligarchy. In other words, with the home game Olympics just 3.5 years away, Mutko had fixed everything. The rotten infrastructure, the lack of incoming talent, the emigre coaches, the widespread doping in just 4 months. By the time the closing ceremony began in all its splendor in Sochi in February 2014, the Russian team had won the medal count. So I guess he did. Except sounds like they cheated to get there. We now know how Mutko was able to achieve that jump from 11th place to 1st in such a short amount of time. An extensive state-sponsored doping campaign. After a German documentary interviewed 2 Russian athletes who had fled Russia and had become whistleblowers about how systematically Russia dopes its athletes, key figures in the world of Russian anti-doping started turning up dead under mysterious circumstances. Sounds familiar. This prompted Grigory Rodchenkov, the head of the Russian anti-doping agency, to flee, fearing for his life, to Los Angeles and to the director Brian Fogel. Director of what? The documentary? Is that what? I don't know. The two had been working together on Fogel's riveting documentary, yes, Icarus, about how easy it is for an athlete to dope and test clean. Rodchenkov, who had been coaching Fogel in his quest to dope for a cycling event and dupe the tests, no clean hands here, decided to confess to Fogel on camera. He also told his story to the New York Times and then went into the U.S. Government Witness Protection Program. How do you like that? Well, that we have a ministry for, eh? Rodchenkov, and by the way, we're not doing that good on, where's the, I know it's not really supposed to be involved in this, but it raises some questions. Is this, should the Government Witness Protection Program be protecting the whistleblower witness from the president and his threats? Rodchenkov ran the lab at Sochi during the Winter Olympics, and what he did there was essentially what he did for Fogel, but on a more massive scale, helping dozens of athletes dope all through the games while testing negative on every single test. The story he told to the Times and to Fogel would strain the imagination were it not independently confirmed by two investigations, one by WADA and one by the International Olympic Committee. Finally, the first mention of the IOC in all this. Here's the summary of the operation from the Times. This all quoted from their piece. The director, Grigory Rodchenkov, who ran the laboratory that handled testing for thousands of Olympians, said he developed a 3-drug cocktail of banned substances that he mixed with liquor and provided to dozens of Russian athletes, helping to facilitate one of the most elaborate and successful doping ploys in sports history. Imagine the guy running the anti-doping operation for the Olympic Games on site is your local cheating official, your cheating consultant for the Russian athletes. I mean, why even bother with that? I guess you want the results of the doping, obviously, but why bother with 3-drug cocktails that make it the disguise? If you're the head of the anti-doping agency there, why not just simply say, dope all you want, we'll just erase the results and say you're clean? I guess that was too easy, and maybe anybody could have done that. You just hire a thug to do that. But if you want it done nice and neat, in case the international WADA group looks into it, it still looks clean. I guess you need a chemist, an expert. And that was the argument that he made to get himself paid, I suppose. So it involved some of Russia's biggest stars of the games, this elaborate program of doping, including 14 members of its cross-country ski team, huge stars, and 2 veteran bobsledders who won 2 golds. In a dark of night operation, Russian anti-doping experts and members of the intelligence service surreptitiously replaced urine samples tainted by performance-enhancing drugs with clean urine collected months earlier, somehow breaking into the supposedly tamper-proof bottles that are the standard at international competitions, Dr. Rodchenkov said. Oh, interesting. So he came up with the 3-drug cocktail that would make it possible for you to be doping and come up clean in tests. Maybe he was just, maybe he was just pissed, but that's a bad pun in this situation. But maybe he was just pissed off that they were dumping his really elaborate chemistry plan for just straight breaking in and stealing the tainted urine and replacing it with clean stuff from several months earlier. That's about as basic as it gets, but as thuggish as it gets, too. So both were going on. That's how systemic this thing really is. For hours each night, who was working on it? The intelligence service and, amazingly, anti-doping experts working several nights. For hours each night, they worked in a shadow laboratory lit by a single lamp. I don't know if that was necessary. Passing bottles of urine through a hand-sized hole in the wall to be ready for testing the next day, he said. I wonder if that was supposed to provide some deniability from people. I can't see who I was working with because we just passed little pee bottles through a hole in the wall. This is not good. It's just it's kind of skeevy even just reading the description of things. Dark laboratory, 1 light bulb, holes in the wall. I don't like any of this. This is all kind of weird. By the end of the games, Dr. Rodchenkov estimated as many as 100 dirty urine samples were expunged. None of the athletes were caught doping. More important, Russia won the most medals of the games, easily surpassing its main rival, the United States, and undermining the integrity of one of the world's most prestigious sporting events. Now, that's the conclusion of the New York Times piece that's quoted here. Back to Julia here. All of this, Rodchenkov said, was overseen by an officer of the Federal Security Services, the FSB, and had the approval of Mutko and Putin. So yes, they do these things. Yes, it is their version of central state security and intelligence that operates in all these. Not difficult at all to believe, given what we have seen with respect to their interference in elections all across the Western world. If you believe that, of course, if you're a Republican, you don't believe in that. And this maybe you need to go the other way. If you can probably believe they cheat this way in sports, but in the most blatant, straightforward possible way. We'll just we'll break in and replace the urine. But maybe if you can believe that, then some of them might be able to then make the leap to, if the FSB was really, if they're really willing in Russia to put their state intelligence community to work on stealing gold medals in the Olympics, that's pretty low. Maybe they would do something like, wouldn't it be more in their bailiwick, really, to be cheating? It's probably easier to believe that they were steering the outcome of elections than the outcome of Olympic medals, because who cares about Olympic medals? But if they'll stoop to even that, I don't know. Not going to persuade any hardcore people, obviously. Anyway, the irony, she continues, is that both wins end up being Pyrrhic victories. Both wins, which two wins, we skipped the last part of the paragraph before it. Where were we about this one? So they had the approval of Mutko and Putin. Rodchenkov told Fogel he was responsible for about half the gold medals, but that's only one of the things he felt guilty for. Only one of the things he said was motivating him. The other was that he felt guilty for Putin's semi-surreptitious invasion of Ukraine. Aha! Ukraine is in here, which began almost as soon as the games had ended. An actual connection, maybe. Let's find out what's going on here. If he hadn't helped Russians win that many medals, Rodchenkov told Fogel, Putin wouldn't have gotten so overly confident as to invade Ukraine, annex its Crimean peninsula, and expect no repercussions. That is a huge leap. But, it's either insane or an amazing insight into the Russian psyche in general. I'm not sure which, or if it's even an either-or situation. It may be both. The irony, there we are, is that both wins end up being Pyrrhic victories. In invading Ukraine and annexing Crimea, Putin got into an expensive quagmire in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine and a peninsula that is nearly impossible to supply with water, electricity, and food. Meant to revive Russia's imperial glory, the move left Russia sanctioned and isolated from the West that it was trying so hard to impress. Again, date of this article we're reading from, just in case you've forgotten or coming in the middle, December 6th, 2017. So this well before the explosion of Ukraine coverage and Ukraine focus in our news. But, even by that point we had heard plenty about what Russia was up to. But we were not keeping an eye on Ukraine as closely as we should have been at that point. In rigging the Olympics, Putin got what he wanted, a successful event and a winning medal count. But the conspiracy that Russia needed to get there inevitably surfaced, and now 11 of those 33 medalists have been stripped of their prizes. Obvious parallel, at least to those of us here listening to this crazy show. In rigging the election, Putin got what he wanted, a successful outcome, I guess, Trump elected, and a winning medal count, that would be Trump's election. But the conspiracy that Russia needed to get there inevitably surfaced, and now that president may be stripped of his prize, although the biggest barrier that stands in the way is the weird predilection in the Senate for hero worship of Donald Trump / fear of political repercussions / party before country. Take your pick. But it's a pretty obvious parallel to me anyway. Others will be given medals in their stead at Pyeongchang Olympics. Russian sport officials like Mutko are now banned from the Olympics for life. Wow. Russian athletes won't be able to compete in the Winter Olympics under their flag. Athletes proven to be clean can compete under a neutral flag. In fact, neither the Russian anthem nor the Russian flag will appear at Pyeongchang. In October, Putin, anticipating the IOC's decision, said that this would be a, quote, a humiliation for the country. Humiliation, a word echoed by many Russians when the punishment was handed down on Tuesday. The same word in the mouths of so many Russians in the wake of the Vancouver flop. Humiliation is a particular obsession for Putin, and Trump, really. The fear of it informing his posturing at home and abroad. Like Trump, actually. Before Americans spoke of making America great again, Russians spoke of Putin raising Russia up off its knees, a 2-decade exercise of expunging the humiliation of the Soviet collapse. Sochi, and the elaborate doping scheme used there, was intended to do just that, to erase the humiliation of Vancouver, to show that Russia had restored its historic glory, to end the international mockery and disdain. Instead, like so many of Russia's moves under Putin, it achieved the opposite, like Trump. Yet again, the glitz turned out to be a sloppy front for the rot. Like Trump, there are an awful lot of parallels. It makes so much more sense sometimes when we read things like this, the relationship between these two guys. It may have been an impressive FSB orchestrated operation, but what did it get them? After Vancouver, Russia may have been smarting with the perceived humiliation of performing below their own expectations, but after Sochi, the Russian flag won't fly at the next Olympics at all. And now it won't be at the next 2 games either. Russian officials are busy denouncing this kind of Olympic Games as hopelessly hobbled and, quote, not even the Olympics, while others call for a full boycott by the clean Russian athletes. This wasn't what Sochi was supposed to achieve. This is a humiliation far worse than Vancouver's. This is pariah status, except that Russia was already a pariah for its actions in Ukraine and for meddling in America's 2016 presidential elections, both of which made Russia's position in the world more complicated, not less. If Putin is the omniscient mastermind many Americans imagine him to be, surely he would have anticipated this? Another parallel to Trump here, I think. When I was last in Moscow, a military analyst told me that after 2 decades of post-Soviet Western mockery, Russia had decided that since no one in the West was going to love it, at least they'd fear it. But what comes after that, when the consequences set in and the fear turns to loathing condescension? Isn't that humiliating? Good question. And the end of the article as well. I think there's a lot to be gleaned from that. You got to kind of read between the lines a little bit. But, well, I wonder if she would revisit this now and make it more overt in her reporting, with the benefit of an additional 2 years of investigation and surfacing of new allegations and new details about how this whole thing was pulled off and on how many fronts it was operating. Very interesting, and I'm glad we took the time for that one. Let's see. I know, I guess ordinarily I would say we should be spending some time on this Afghanistan article, but I have a feeling that might be something we want to either devote an entire show to or digest off the air at some point. But we'll just note for the record and thank Greg for bringing it up so that you're aware that we're aware. But I don't know if we can get any good read of it and substantive analysis in there and then be able to get to some of the other things going on. Before the weekend, on Friday, we spent a little bit of time talking about who it was that Rudy Giuliani was meeting with and asking questions about who else he might be meeting with in Kyiv. And we had some reporting on that, and I think we can add to that now. I have a piece here from Anna Nemtsova. Not sure where the emphasis falls on that one. Here in the Daily Beast, doing great work on all this stuff. Rudy Giuliani's Ukraine investigation stars some of Kyiv's most dubious characters. It's kind of what we were getting at on Friday. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe we can make a note to myself. Ready for this? Is the note to myself portion of the show. Find out if we can get Matt Gaetz's quote about not knowing what Giuliani is up to exactly in Ukraine. Even Matt Gaetz, who's usually somehow unembarrassed to be defending Trump's position in all of this, was saying aloud essentially, maybe Giuliani shouldn't be there right now. It doesn't look that good, and I can't explain it. Anyway, the president's lawyer, the subheader reads, went to Ukraine to discredit impeachment with a parallel narrative, but corruption fighters know his witnesses have little or no credibility. Good, let's read about that. Kyiv, Ukraine is our dateline here. The witnesses stand with their right hands raised as if being sworn in for, well, an impeachment hearing. Only this is not in Congress. The cast of obscure Ukrainians, a group seen at home as odious and discredited, are appearing on a television show with President Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, in what he casts as an investigation that parallels the process in Congress. It would only be credible in a parallel world. Interesting. So he's not only gone off, we read last week that he was there to film a documentary of sorts and bring back what he claims would be evidence not only of Trump's innocence and Russia's innocence, but Ukraine's guilt and the Democrats' guilt, not to mention Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and everybody else, and maybe even Hillary Clinton and Franklin Delano Roosevelt as well. Why not? We'll throw him in too. We did hear over the weekend Trump saying or hinting, and there's another note to myself, Trump saying that Rudy was going to be making some kind of a report to Congress and possibly to the Attorney General as well, although under what authority he would even be being heard from, I have no idea. And I did notice, I know where I'll find those tweets. Armando was commenting, the forbidden Armando, was commenting on Twitter that really there ought to be a congressional inquiry at this point into Rudy Giuliani himself, like actually specifically focused on him and what is he doing. And there ought to be, and the grounds are there probably, but you'd have to do a little bit of explaining. But if you want to skip past all that, I would say if he's going to submit a report or even attempt to submit some sort of report to the Attorney General or Congress or both, I mean, that's all the excuse you need. At this point, he's just a random dude at this point. I know he's famous. He used to be the mayor of New York. I understand he says he's a lawyer, all of that. But, I want paperwork on everybody. I don't know. From what I can see, you haven't done anything official in a long time. You're just a random dude. You want to submit a report? We're going to need to know what you were up to and how you were doing it. You're going to say that's privileged somehow, and we're going to say, then we don't want your report, I guess. I guess the Republicans can still read it, but who cares about them? They don't have a majority in the House. Anyway, back to this article here. Andrei Telesenko, who we mentioned on Friday, is first up here. A former Ukrainian diplomat and who has been helping Giuliani produce the show for OAN, the One America News Network, usually OANN. I think I see it designated, but that's one of those loopy right-wing operations that we've mentioned in the past. A conservative channel now favored by Trump because Fox isn't reliably Trumpian enough for him anymore. OAN is publicizing the two-part broadcast this weekend. I guess, was that the other day? Because I think this must have been, what did I give the date on this piece? It's been updated. First published on the 7th. So yes, so this past weekend is when who would know what is on OAN over the weekend? I certainly don't know. You'll have to take her word for it. OAN is publicizing the two-part broadcast this weekend, promising witnesses who destroy House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff and his baseless impeachment case against President Trump. None of the OAN work, to my knowledge, has bubbled its way to the surface of mainstream Twitter just yet. But if you have any links to it, I'd love to take a look, but I don't know if I'd put time into it on the air. Watch top Ukrainian officials testify under oath. The side of the story Schiff doesn't want you to hear, proclaims the YouTube promo for the broadcast. That's an interesting concept right there, that they're under oath. I mean, Rudy Giuliani, I guess, goes through the motions. It's just a question of, does it mean anything to swear an oath under Giuliani's administration if the proceeding isn't convened under any legal authority? I mean, you take depositions certainly under oath outside of court, but that's because the depositions are requested, scheduled, and sanctioned with judicial agreement. And officers of the court take those depositions under the claim of the jurisdiction of the court. And I mean, you can take those depositions outside of the physical, jurisdiction of the court, outside of the district or outside of the country even, if you want. But I don't think I mean, I guess that's the key difference here is I told you to hold up your right hand and everything and swear, but A, I don't know if they do that in Ukraine necessarily. It might be meaningless to them. And B, I've missed the intro to the next break, so we better get that rolling. And we'll cut out right in the beginning of the music this time. Instead, I probably should have ran the 1 minute break music instead. All right, we'll be right back. Wow. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, I think we're back in from the break. We must have screwed that break up horribly from everyone else's perspective. And then we'll present some engineering challenges after the fact. I don't know what it was, but the alarm went off, and I just sort of turned it off as we usually do, and then lost track of time at that point. So now there's some question about what made it into the broadcast before the break and what didn't. But I guess we'll recap for those purposes and try again. I was mentioning that it was One America News Network that was airing this supposed proceeding. I mean, it was originally being billed as a documentary of sorts, and I guess it'll still be presented that way. But there's this, the promo says, watch top Ukrainian officials testify under oath to the side of the story that Schiff doesn't want you to hear. So I guess as part of the production, Giuliani, in questioning these Ukrainian witnesses, has them go through the motions of being sworn in to something. But to what, we don't know. And that there's a major difference between, for instance, being sworn in court or as a witness before Congress and being mock sworn in on One America News Network by Rudy Giuliani. And although I had noted maybe while we were off the air again that you can, for instance, swear people in and take sworn testimony in a deposition, it isn't taking place in a courtroom and doesn't have any official trappings in the physical space where you're taking the deposition. That's not the magic. The magic is that these things have been sanctioned by a court of competent jurisdiction, and that officers of the court, the attorneys involved, have arranged all of the logistics of the deposition through a court-sanctioned plan. So that even though you're meeting perhaps in the offices of a private attorney, perhaps outside of the jurisdiction of the physical jurisdiction of the court, maybe outside the wrong state or even in another country or whatever, as long as you are in compliance with the court-approved schedule of depositions and the right parties are there and they're represented by counsel and there's a court reporter there, you can effectively swear people in and hold people to the standards of perjury if they are later found to be lying in the deposition. I believe that's the case, yes, and that would be the big difference. I'm not enough of a practicing attorney to know for sure the ins and outs of how depositions are arranged, but that's certainly my understanding, procedurally speaking, and with speaking to it from having gone through law school anyway. Here, though, there's no court sanction for any of this. I suppose, could you make the argument? I guess we'll have to consult with the practicing attorneys whether you could make the argument this could be regarded as a sworn affidavit of sorts. And presumably, but even at that point, you would have to then seek the permission of the court and the agreement of both parties before the court before the affidavit could be accepted as evidence. And here you would just say, Rudy Giuliani going with a wingnut camera crew to Ukraine to take the quote-unquote sworn testimony of discredited gangsters and politicians in Ukraine is just not, it's certainly not going to pass muster before the House committees for any reason. But then they'll just, I guess the idea is that they'll then play victim. We took sworn testimony. Look, there's video of them raising their right hand and swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, even though no one knows whether that means anything at all to Ukrainians in general, much less their mobsters. But it doesn't mean anything to mobsters here either, right? Okay. Anyway, so that was the promo. Watch top Ukrainian officials testify under oath to the side of the story Schiff doesn't want you to hear. This, by the way, is the YouTube promo for the broadcast because that's where One America News Network exists. They don't have a channel. They just put stuff on YouTube, which I do, but I don't claim to be a network. Anyway, top officials, they are not. That's the thing. Indeed, Giuliani's choice of guest stars in his would-be reality show and his wider cast of sources caused shock among many in Kiev's establishment who know their questionable backgrounds in considerable detail. It was shocking to say this is not how this works. That's right. Don't get so upset about it. I'm just saying most people knew exactly who they were dealing with. Here's an embedded tweet about this, by the way, with some of the photos of him raising his right hand to fake swear in on things from Andrei Telesenko, who tweets, tune in to OANN with Chanel Rion, I guess is the name of the reporter who does this stuff. Is this her, let me just click through. That must be her Twitter account. Okay. I did see our friend Wooter tweeting a picture of this person around alongside a picture of ye old example of Jeff Guckert / Gannon. You remember him from Talon News back in the day? And I guess just saying, it's the same act essentially here. But okay, so they have this spokesmodel anchor here. Tune in to OANN with Chanel Rion and America's mayor and attorney. Now he's a mayor. Now he's America's attorney. Now that's great. Rudy Giuliani to hear the truth in all caps in the 2016 U.S. election and what really happened in Ukraine with the real corruption, says Andrei Telesenko. And he includes in his tweet 2 photos. One of him standing around with the, cast and crew, or maybe some other people who were being interviewed, plus Chanel Rayon and Rudy Giuliani on what they would like us to call the set of the OAN interview. And the other is of him and I guess some of the other officials testifying, raising their right hands in American fashion as though they were being sworn into something. Their left hands are not placed on anything in particular. Very often when they do these things, actually when they're taking oaths, sometimes they have the hand on the Bible thing. Not always necessary, I suppose. So we won't hold that much against them. Although it does look like, what's his name here, has got his left hand, Telesenko has got his left hand on his phone, which could, for all we know, be open to a Bible app. So we can't entirely dismiss all of this, except for the substantive content, which ought to be enough, really. Anyway, back to our article. What Giuliani's collaborators have in common is their willingness to testify in his parallel proceedings, or possibly the impeachment trial in the Senate, in the improbable event that they are called, or contribute in other ways to Trump's cause. Some of them have been doing so for years in Ukraine. Their testimony won't accommodate President Donald Trump's favor requested during the infamous July 25th phone conversation with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump and his representatives made it clear they wanted an announcement by Zelensky of a Biden investigation, and that has not happened. But will Giuliani's machinations help put pressure on Zelensky finally to come around? That remains an open question. Those working with Giuliani include a member of Ukraine's parliament, the Rada, who is in Zelensky's party. So that's the first I've heard, by the way, of Giuliani being able to work at all with anyone in Zelensky's party. Remember, we asked this question heading into the weekend. Why is it that Rudy in Ukraine has not gone to see the real deal? Remember that was the whole excuse. We were holding up the funds to find out whether Zelensky was the real deal and would really fight corruption. And then we found out, of course, that he was the real deal, and we released the money, even though they actually released the money because they had been caught, not because they were convinced that Zelensky was real or not real or had anything at all to offer them. They just got caught and thought that they could undo the whole thing by, restoring the money and then saying no harm, no foul. But the public-facing excuse was that we were holding up the money just so long as it took to research whether Zelensky was really going to be a genuine corruption fighter or not. And we came to the conclusion that he would be. And of course, remember that the July 25th phone call, the premise for it, the official premise for it, was to congratulate Zelensky for his party having won an outright majority in the Rada, in the Ukraine parliament. And so we have the real deal and his party now in total control of government. And that being good news because he was the real deal for corruption fighting. So off Giuliani goes once again to Ukraine on a corruption fighting mission, and he meets with, until now, we had thought, precisely 0 members of the real deal corruption fighting party. But he did manage to find one who was willing to meet with him. Now, back to our article. I don't know if we'll find out who that one person was, but it's kind of important. Trump asked Zelensky for 2 things: to investigate the Bidens and explore the debunked theory that Ukraine meddled significantly in the 2016 election. He asked Zelensky to find the hidden DNC server mentioned in Russian propaganda in order to discredit Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report indicting 12 members of the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, for hacking the Democratic National Committee. The server, they say Ukraine has it, Trump told Zelensky. But Ukrainian independent corruption and hacking experts share doubts about Giuliani's sources' intentions and the so-called evidence against Joe Biden and his son. They also see no substantiation of Russia's aggressively propagated conspiracy theory. Trump also asked Zelensky to work with Giuliani, which there's really no reason to do. He's not an official of any kind. These requests, actually, let me just pause there before my voice breaks again, but asking Zelensky to work with Giuliani is more than just saying, I want you to work with somebody who has no official sanction of any kind. It is also the case that, once again, and they have insisted from the beginning that this was the case. Both Giuliani and Trump have insisted from the beginning that Giuliani is there as Trump's personal attorney, right? So, on the question of whether or not what Trump is using his official leverage for is asking for personal favors, we don't really, it helps, but we don't need to go far enough into the question to ask whether he meant he wanted help with his reelection effort. What he's asking for directly in asking for Zelensky to talk to and deal with Giuliani is for the president of Ukraine, at the behest of the president of the United States, to talk to the personal attorney of the president of the United States. So if your question is there personal gain involved? The answer is there has to be, because if this person is the personal attorney of anyone, the benefit that's going to inure to that person is personal by definition. Had he sent Barr, he could at least have made the excuse that the us in do us a favor really was the United States and not just him. So that's problematic all by itself, and I don't see a lot of focus on it, but, it's hair splitting, I suppose. And there's so much other good dirt to be unearthed. They're focusing on a lot of other things. Anyway, but not to mention the fact that, yes, at bottom, what he really is doing is asking for help cheating in the election, and that's a lot more exciting and worrying a prospect than whether or not this is really self-dealing on behalf of the president to leverage taxpayer money for cooperation for his personal attorney. But you can't make the connection any more direct than that. He keeps saying himself that he's his personal attorney, open and shut as far as personal benefit goes. Just keep that in mind. These requests coming at a time when vital military support for Ukraine was frozen, as we all know, and no date was set for a promised White House meeting, pending Zelensky's cooperation, are what triggered impeachment proceedings against Trump for abuse of power. He's accused of using the authority of the United States government to further his own personal, political, and legal agenda. None of the requests has been fulfilled, maybe, and there is a strong belief among Ukraine's independent corruption fighters that President Zelensky is not going to take Trump's side in the impeachment process. Maybe. Last week, Zelensky studiously avoided Giuliani. That's smart. On the way to Kyiv, Giuliani met with Ukraine's ex-prosecutor general, Yuri Lutsenko, in Budapest. But so far as we can tell from the promotional video, Lutsenko does not appear on the panel in the OAN show. I guess the show will have aired by now, maybe, or maybe they backed out of it because they didn't get the results they wanted. Anybody know? In an interview with the BBC in September, Lutsenko said he was ready to testify in the impeachment hearings, that he was, quote, not afraid of anything other than Ukraine falling victim to the storm around the American scandal. But of course, it is one thing to say you're not afraid to testify, and a completely different thing to make statements under oath in front of Congress and thereby open yourself up to prosecution. Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, is now in prison for doing that. Lutsenko, last September, facing nothing more than a BBC camera, sounded meek when pressed to say if he had evidence to back up the Republicans' argument that Joe Biden supported the energy company Burisma that had appointed his son to its board. It's not my jurisdiction, Lutsenko said. I cannot do anything that is not connected with Ukrainian law. The most knowledgeable source of the multiple probes opened into Burisma Holdings, but never completed, are two former prosecutors, Viktor Shokin and Konstantin Kulyuk. Some of Trump's obsession with the Biden issue can be traced to interviews that Giuliani conducted with Lutsenko and Shokin back in January, with the help of Ukrainian businessmen Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas, both of whom have since been indicted by the U.S. Justice Department for illegal campaign contributions. That gives me an opportunity to answer my lingering question, as I note for the record, about, as Greg mentioned, Li Fang from The Intercept being photographed by Devin Nunes for the crime of asking him, why were you talking to Lev Parnas on your phone back in April? And I was wondering about that because I know when Nunes has answered the question or offered up words in response to the question, he said something about, well, I got a call from Lev Parnas's wife's phone and I didn't know who it was, so I handed it over to staff or whatever, that as though that were supposed to answer anything. It actually just makes it worse. But my question is, how would you even have known who Lev Parnas was in April of this year? Because nobody outside of this circle knew who Lev Parnas was really before late September, early October of this year. So in April, you really have to be inside the circle here to have your phone come up with an ID of Lev Parnas and even answer the call. Like, my phone in April rings Lev Parnas. I say, wrong number. I don't know who that is. And I don't answer it. I don't hand it to staff or anything. But in April, 4, 5, 6 months before anybody else knows who Lev Parnas is, he's getting calls from Lev Parnas. Okay. Well, now we know why. Because 3 months earlier than that, Parnas is in Ukraine with Giuliani conducting interviews of Lutsenko and Shokin. So 3 months later, in April of 2019, when Nunes's phone rings with the designator, he claims, Lev Parnas' wife, he answers saying, oh, well, Lev Parnas is going to be there. That's the guy who's been working with Giuliani, interviewing the Ukrainian prosecutors. That's why I want someone to take the call, whether it's me or staff. So, okay, that helps answer some of that question. The memos of Giuliani's January interviews were delivered to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's office in a manila envelope with the return address listed as the White House. You remember this one? This was the weird envelope that showed up right after the conclusion of Mueller's testimony, I think, following his report. And as somebody pointed out, that the manila envelope with the return address to the White House had just been hand lettered on the thing and as basically faked up. So inside, among other things perhaps, were Giuliani's memos of his January interviews with Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman by his side when they were done. They and the envelope are among about 100 pages obtained last month through a Freedom of Information Act request by the watchdog organization, I think it's American Bridge. They left out the bridge, which is American space period. So hopefully my guess is right on that one. Of all the people Giuliani met with in Kyiv, ex-prosecutor General Shokin would probably take the risk and testify in the upcoming hearing in the Senate. I guess they think he's the most likely to actually show for something like that. Ukrainian politician Borislav Bereza told the Daily Beast. Shokin was removed from his position in 2016, partly as a result of pressure from the United States government, including Biden, who was the Obama administration's point man on Ukraine. Extensive testimony in Congress by U.S. diplomats support the conclusion that Shokin's dismissal was the result of the prosecutor's own alleged corruption. The co-founder of Hromadske TV. How do you like that? Hromadske, Hromadske TV. Natalia Gumenyuk sees another role for the prosecutor in the reality show hearings, his service to the Kremlin-connected billionaire Dmytro Firtash. Remember him? Who he is, of course, awaiting extradition from his villa in Vienna to the United States. Shokin helps Firtash develop the conspiracy of Ukraine's interference with the U.S. election in 2016. So once behind bars in the U.S., Firtash could claim he was a victim of political injustice. It seems that everybody in Giuliani's Ukrainian camp has his own agenda. Take MPs Alexander Dubinsky, a member of the ruling Servant of the People party, that would be Zelensky's party, and Andrei Derkash, remember him? We talked about on Friday, who was educated at the Dzerzhinsky Higher School of the KGB Intelligence Services in Moscow. I'm sure I pronounced the name of that badly, but I don't want to spend any time on it. According to his official biography, Derkash served as the head of the technical department in the, Pervomayskaya, Pervo, that's the actual beginning of that, Pervomayskaya, Pervomayskaya division. I'm sure it means something else, wink, wink, of the division of the Soviet Strategic Rocket Forces in 1989. Bad timing. Derkash also served in the Security Service of Ukraine, or SBU, in a town in Ukraine. We'll just leave it at that. I'm sorry. When his father, General Leonid Derkash, I don't think we knew that on Friday, the future head of that service, was responsible for technical defense of information. Like he might know something about hacking. In January of 2014, shortly before the Euromaidan revolution, Euromaidan, I didn't realize what I was reading here. Revolution of Dignity, 2014. See, damn it. I knew it. I got it wrong. So the Orange Revolution is 2004. Revolution of Dignity, 2014. Too many revolutions in Ukraine. Anyway, before that Revolution of Dignity ousted pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych from Ukraine. Derkach, as a member of Yanukovych's Party of Regions, voted for so-called dictatorship laws targeting social freedoms. A survivor of political storms, Derkach managed to make his way back to the Rada after the revolution and find a new target for criticism. He has been accusing Ukrainian politicians and diplomats of illegal interference in U.S. elections since 2017. Good timing that time. Derkach has collected information about the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, or NABU, N-A-B-U, not the Star Wars reference, but anyway, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, hinting that its officials consulted with U.S. diplomats and the FBI about Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort's corrupt practices and kickbacks when he worked for Yanukovych. This fall, Derkach showed what he called indications that NABU had passed some documents related to Burisma in an unlawful way to the U.S. Embassy. All right, so at least we're getting some sense of what his story is about. But of course, by the way, the participation of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, cooperation with the U.S. diplomats and FBI, would be the way you would actually conduct a legitimate, take note of this, the way you would actually conduct a legitimate investigation in cooperation with Ukrainian authorities about corruption that may or may not have affected things in the United States. What you don't do is send your private lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, there to take fake depositions about things or whatever, or make back channel inquiries about starting an investigation. It's not a matter of the President of the United States talking to the President of Ukraine and say, do us a favor, and I won't give you American resources duly appropriated by the Congress unless you do these things for us. You contact the embassy and the FBI, and they talk to the local authorities about conducting an investigation. It's not done the other way. I'm sure in Trump's mind, such as it is, he believes he's cutting red tape and making the request directly, person to person, personality to personality. As president to president, we'll get this done because we're the doers in all this. Why go through the red tape? And again, the red tape, like phone call logs, like visitor logs, are things that are designed for your protection. The president doesn't handle these things. They go through regular procedure so that there are checkpoints along the way to discourage corruption. If it's done person to person, there's the opportunity for corruption. If it's done openly and at the right checkpoints, then there's internal controls against, corruption, which is what you're here to fight, supposedly. But you're lying about that, and we know that. Both Derkach and Dubinsky clearly want to be heard by Giuliani and his client in the White House. They organized a press conference in early October after meeting with Giuliani, and Dubinsky described plans to create a commission at the Rada to investigate the plundering and laundering of billions of dollars from the Ukrainian budget during the presidencies of both Yanukovych and his post-Euromaidan successor, Petro Poroshenko. Dubinsky is the most scandalous and toxic member of Zelensky's party. That's how they got him. A former journalist with dubious wealth, nothing will stop him from getting involved in shadowy, corrupt deals, Gumenyuk told the Daily Beast. The Ukrainian media group Bihus, BIHUS.info. Don't know them, not familiar, I don't think, with their work. Anyway, they have published investigative reports into Dubinsky's alleged ill-gotten gains. So there's a link here. You can take a look. Perhaps we'll take a look. I don't know if they are in English or Ukrainian. Actually, why not take a look? Yeah, looks like they're printed in Ukrainian, but worth a look, perhaps, if you can get a good, reliable translation. There is a bit more to this piece that I guess we will not be able to get through, but it does answer our questions. Now that we've found out that, okay, Giuliani satisfies our demand that he speak to someone from the Real Deal party, he did find someone who was willing to talk to him, but as it turns out, he's the most, somehow, just by some coincidence, the most scandalous and toxic member of that party. and somebody under investigation by independent anti-corruption forces in the Ukraine as it stands. So there we have it. That is our answer. That's who Giuliani's been talking to. This is how he intends to present his information, and you can take it with the appropriate level of deference. Therefore, you now know what to do going forward. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. He's got lots to cover as well. Trump, as it turns out, he's going to be reporting, could be impeached for admissions to the Ukrainian bribery plot that were broadcast live on Fox News. Amazing. Security video shows Border Patrol lied about the death of a migrant teen in U.S. custody. A federal judge slammed Florida Republicans' attempt to deny voting rights to thousands, and much more.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com.
Okay, guess what? I got it wrong.
You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, guess what happened? I touched the screen and scrolled back to his description of his Friday show. So if you missed that, that was an excellent recap for what happened on Friday, and I do recommend that you go back. That did sound awfully familiar. There's more, of course, here on the Monday program, a brand new one coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. I encourage you to listen in and find out what's going on, because I certainly didn't know.